Good afternoon, class. This is Dr. Regina Reyes from the section of Neurology. I am assigned to give you this first lecture of the course. This is actually a continuation of your clinical diagnosis in second year. So in second year, you were already introduced to the principles and concepts of anatomical localization of the different lesions in the nervous system. However, it is also necessary to determine the pathologic features of these lesions. Okay, so this lecture is a review of the neurocytology and pathologic reactions of the nervous system. So for your further readings, I would refer you to your medical neuroscience textbooks, and this is found in chapter 4. The objectives of this lecture is first, to describe the structural elements of the nervous system, and then we will go to the mechanisms of injury of the nervous system, as well as the pathologic reactions of the different structural elements to injury. And then lastly, we will give you some tips on how to correlate clinical manifestations and data gathered from the history and physical examination with that of the underlying pathology. To start with, the nervous system is composed of cells coming from the neuroectoderm and the mesoderm. The neurons and the glial cells are derived from the ectoderm, whereas the other supporting cells are derived from the mesoderm. The functional units of the nervous system are the neurons. These are the most important cells of the nervous system. They have two important and interrelated functions, that is, signaling and tropism. They generate and conduct electrical activity, transmit information throughout the nervous system, and exert long-term effects required for storage of information. Remember that mature, normal neurons do not undergo cell division, but they can undergo adaptive changes in morphology and function in response to activity or injury. Here is a diagram of a spinal motor neuron, and shown here is the neuron cell body, which has a very prominent central nucleus. Protruding out of the neuron cell body are processes, no? So we have several short processes we call the dendrites, and we have one long process we call the axon. The dendrites act as antennae and transmit incoming signals toward the cell body, while the axon conducts electrical activity and trophic influences away from the cell body and toward another neuron or toward an effector organ that can be a mast cell or a gland. We now go to the glial cells of neuroectodermal origin. We will discuss the oligodendrocytes and the Schwann cells together because they share an important function. Both of them form the insulating sheaths of axons called the myelin. In the CNS, this is done by the oligodendrocytes, and in the PNS, this is done by the Schwann cells. The myelin consists of multiple, tightly wrapped layers of plasma membrane that ensheath larger diameter axons. In the peripheral nervous system, each Schwann cell interacts with one axon and contributes to the formation of a single internode, just like here in the diagram. In the central nervous system, however, processes from a single oligodendrocyte contribute to the myelin sheaths of several axons near the oligodendrocytes. There is no basement membrane surrounding the oligodendrocytes or the central axons. And then we have the astrocytes, the star-like glial cells of the central nervous system. So these are very important, critical in the function of the central nervous system, and they have a lot of interactions with the neurons. They support neuronal migration during development. They provide substrates for neuronal energy metabolism. They maintain the chemical microenvironment of the brain and the spinal cord. They contribute to the regulation of synaptic transmission and the coupling of blood flow to neuronal activity. And they participate in the response to injury and repair of the nervous system. So here in the diagram, Okay, you will see the star-like astrocytes, no? And you see the foot processes projecting towards a capillary. The ependymal cells come from the neuroepithelial cells of the ventricular zone of the neural tube. In the mature brain, this forms a single layer of ciliated columnar epithelium, which lines the interventricular system of the cerebral hemispheres and the brainstem. Tight junctions between adjacent ependymal cells form a selective barrier that prevents passage of substances between the CSF and the brain substance. The ependyma also gives rise to the choroid plexus, which produces the CSF. The microglia are supporting cells of mesodermal origin. They are considered specialized macrophages that migrate into the CNS along with the blood vessels. So they are like blood cells of mesodermal origin and of monocytic lineage. Normally, they're very scanty and inconspicuous in the brain and the spinal cord, and they only proliferate in response to injury. They look like small, rod-like cells under the microscope. The other supporting cells of mesodermal origin are the connective tissues that protect the nervous system. So in the CNS, these are the meninges. The pia and the arachnoid are what we refer to as the leptomeninges, and the tougher dura as the pachymenix. In the peripheral nervous system, they are the fibrous connective tissues that envelope and protect the peripheral nerves and the cranial nerves. These are the endoneurium, the perineurium, and the epineurium. Moving on, we go to the mechanisms of injury of the nervous system. In some conditions, the pathologic alteration may primarily affect neuronal function alone, without changes in physical appearance of the cell. So this produces transient neurologic disorders like seizures, TIAs, hypokalemic paralysis, etc. And in between these attacks, the nervous system is normal. However, in many diseases, the cellular appearance is altered by the pathologic process or their reaction to it. Basically, damage to tissues or cells result from number one, genetic defects, and number two, loss of availability of essential nutrients, entry of toxic substances, or attachment of antibodies to the cell membrane. Very important points to remember, class. Okay? Oxidative metabolism of glucose in the mitochondria is vital for the survival of the cell in the nervous system. So you need both oxygen and glucose supply. Next, most ATP consumption in the nervous system is for fueling the sodium-potassium ATPase pump to restore the ion gradients altered by excitatory neurotransmission and neuronal activity. And ATP is also critical for preventing excessive accumulation of glutamate in the synaptic space, as well as for preventing the excessive accumulation of calcium ions in the cytosol or the cytoplasm of the cell, and both of which are toxic to the cells. So how do cells die in the nervous system? There are three pathways: necrosis, apoptosis, and autophagy. So necrosis reflects an underlying pathologic process that produces abrupt and severe loss of ATP, such as in cardiac arrest or in stroke, or excessive mechanical strain, such as in trauma, or excessive neuronal energy demands, such as in status epilepticus. Apoptosis, on the other hand, is a form of programmed cell death, essential for normal development. So this is triggered by DNA mutations, inflammatory mediators, and abnormal intracellular and protein and oxidative stress. A slower ATP depletion releases certain intramitochondrial constituents, triggering apoptosis. So again, remember, Necrosis is produced by abrupt and severe loss of ATP. Apoptosis is caused by a slower ATP depletion. The last one is autophagy. So this is a homeostatic process, a normal process, by which cells degrade its organelles to maintain balance between synthesis and degradation and subsequent turnover. This diagram shows us the main mechanisms in necrosis and apoptosis. So we start with acute loss of glucose and oxygen, leading to acute energy failure and impaired sodium-potassium ATPase pump in the cell membrane. So this leads to depolarization, which releases neuroexcitotoxic glutamate, which in the synapses, which eventually will also um, bind with the receptors of the cell membrane and produce further depolarization. This depolarization also opens the calcium channel ion channels and invites the calcium channels intracellularly. This produces the accumulation of glutamate, and the influx of calcium invites more oxidative stress in the cell and membrane disruption, leading to necrosis. On the other hand, um, we may have a slower pathology, a form of inflammation or accumulation of abnormal proteins intracellularly, and this induces pro-apoptotic cascade inside the mitochondria, leading to slow energy failure and eventually to necrosis, or to cytochrome-mediated release of capsaicin causing nuclear disintegration and eventually apoptosis as well. Now we go to specific pathologic reactions of the different cells. We start with the neurons. So very important and very common would be ischemic cell change. So after abrupt loss of oxygen and glucose to the brain, the neuron acutely swells. And then after 6 to 12 hours from insult, the neurons shrink, they become smaller, angular, and stain eosinophilic or red. The nucleus also shrinks and stains darkly until you end up with a red dead neuron. Now remember class that 2 to 5 minutes after complete oxygen deprivation, this can already result in irreversible neuronal damage. And so we have to resuscitate the brain and restore oxygen and blood flow, ASAP. Neurons are also more susceptible to energy deprivation than the glial cells or the endothelial cells. Sometimes the neuron suffers injury to its axon. So the neuron cell body reacts to such injury to its axon by central chromatolysis. So what happens here is that the neuron cell body swells, the Nissl granules dissolve, and the nucleus migrates to the periphery. The normal appearance of the neuron cell body may be restored in a few months. Sometimes neuronal inclusions are formed by injured or pathologic neurons. Filamentous inclusions consist of abnormal deposits of self-aggregating, misfolded proteins that are important features of several neurodegenerative diseases. Here you have neurofibrillary tangles. These are seen intranuclearly, containing hyperphosphorylated tau protein. And you also see here neuritic plaques. These are extracellular beta amyloid containing peptides that are typical of Alzheimer's disease. Cell loss and accumulation of Lewy bodies, which contain alpha-synuclein in dopaminergic neurons, are characteristic of Parkinson disease. Here is a table lifted from your book. Okay, so this shows the other neuronal inclusions that can be seen, no, in specifically in certain diseases. Mullerian degeneration is the degeneration of the distal axon and its myelin sheath after the cell body has been destroyed or separated from the proximal axon. So this proceeds more rapidly in the peripheral nervous system than in the central nervous system. Axonal regeneration is possible in the peripheral nervous system if the parent cell body survives, but this does not occur in the central nervous system. The trophic influences of the Schwann cells in the peripheral nerves and the basement membrane provide a tubular superstructure for the axons to sprout and remyelinate at a rate of around 3 millimeters per day in the peripheral nerves. In contrast, there is no basement membrane or collagen sheaths in the central nervous system. The oligodendrocytes are also not capable of proliferating. And the astrocytes, which proliferate during injury, also produce glial scars. And these deter functional regeneration of the axons in the central nervous system. The oligodendrocytes are extremely sensitive to injury like ischemia, infections, toxins, or metabolic injury. But most importantly, it is caused by immune mediation. The oligodendrocyte nuclei shrink or break up and then dissolve. Demyelination in the CNS may be secondary to damage of the oligodendrocyte cell body or destruction of the myelin sheath. These myelinating disorders, or what we also call as leukodystrophies, result from failure to form and maintain normal myelin sheaths. These are genetic disorders commonly due to defects of lysosomal or peroxisomal metabolism. So here on the left of your screen is a fresh specimen of the brain, and you will see that there are structures wherein there are arrows no pointing into them. These are actually areas of demyelination no in the white matter, and under the microscope these areas will show you axons that are devoid of myelin sheaths and loss of oligodendrocytes. On the other side of the screen, you have here a cross section of the pons, and this is stained by myelin stain. And you will note that there are faint areas, no, which did not take up the stain. So these are the demyelinated areas of the basis pontis. Now we go to the Schwann cells. The Schwann cells may be affected by inherited as well as acquired diseases. If it is inherited, so therefore it is caused by a gene mutation such as in Charcot-Marie-Tooth polyneuropathy. If it is acquired, it is usually immune-mediated and produce segmental demyelination such as seen here in a teased fiber specimen of the sural nerve. So here you will see areas of demyelination in a segmental fashion. So you have intervening areas of myelinated fibers. No? On the other picture, you will see here the cross-section of an axon with areas of demyelination and remyelination after a chronic period of disease of the Schwann cells. Astrocytes also acutely react to injury by swelling, and so you will see these gemistocytic astrocytes or swollen astrocytes beside areas of injury inside the brain, such as in strokes. They also proliferate and form progressively longer and thicker cytoplasmic processes that create a dense network in the damaged brain parenchyma, leading to fibrillary gliosis or scarring The ependymal cells have very limited potential for proliferation in response to injury. Atrophy, stretching, or tearing, and interruption may occur in hydrocephalus or infections or trauma or toxins. The microglia, in response to injury, proliferate and become hypertrophic. They express antigen-presenting molecules and secrete inflammatory mediators. Morphologic changes include formation of rod cells and neuronophagia, just like here, no? And formation of microglial nodules and transformation into foamy macrophages. Inflammation and immune attacks on the nervous system are important mechanisms of neurologic disease, including infections, demyelinating diseases, autoimmune disorders, paraneoplastic disorders, ischemia, and tissue necrosis. These are characterized by the presence of leukocytic infiltrates in the nervous system. They may be mediated by humoral or cellular cytotoxic mechanisms, or by both. Oncogenesis, or tumor formation in the nervous system, is caused by uncontrolled cellular proliferation caused by genetic alterations or somatic mutations. There is activation of the oncogenes or inactivation of the tumor suppressor genes, or both. A general correlation exists between the normal capacity of the cell to undergo cell division and its tendency to undergo neoplasia. So tumors arising from mature neurons are rare because normal mature neurons cannot proliferate. Astrocytomas and meningiomas, on the other hand, are the most common primary tumors. The histologic degree of malignancy, the specific chromosomal abnormalities, and gene mutation patterns predict the rapidity of growth, response to therapy, risk of recurrence, and length of survival. Primary CNS tumors rarely metastasize to the system from the nervous system. There are two basic types of cerebral edema. The first one is vasogenic edema, which reflects pathologically increased permeability of the blood-brain barrier and occurs with mass lesions or inflammatory diseases. Cytotoxic edema, on the other hand, is due to increased intracellular water in astrocytes and less often inside the neurons, and occurs with hypoxia and other metabolic disorders. Cytotoxic and vasogenic edema may coexist in ischemia or traumatic lesions. Cerebral edema leads to an increase in intracranial pressure, a decrease in cerebral blood flow, and secondary brain damage. On the left of your screen is an example of cytotoxic edema. This is caused by cerebral infarction. So you will see here that this area of hypodensity by CT scan affects both the gray matter as well as the white matter of the brain. On the other hand, you have here vasogenic type or vasogenic type of edema affecting primarily the white matter of the brain, and this is most likely caused by this lesion, probably a tumor, no? And you will see that even if the tumor is just around 1 by 2 centimeters in diameter, the edema is extensive, no, surrounding the tumor. Now, for clinical diagnosis, this requires analysis of two types of data. The first data is for localization of the disease process. It allows determination of whether the lesion is focal, multifocal, or diffuse. The second data is about the temporal profile. This one allows determination of whether the lesion is acute, subacute, or chronic. and whether it is transient, improving, progressive, or static, and these in turn allow prediction of the underlying pathology as vascular, inflammatory, neoplastic, degenerative, or other. Here are some examples of the localizing characteristic and temporal profile of the different classifications of neurological diseases. So, number one, vascular disease is sudden in onset. It can be ischemic or hemorrhagic. It can be focal or diffuse. The onset of inflammatory, infectious, and immune disorders is generally subacute. Inflammatory disorders like infections, immunologic, toxic, may be focal, multifocal, or diffuse. Abscesses, granulomas, and large demyelinating lesions may produce mass lesions. Infectious disorders are always progressive without treatment, but demyelinating or other immune disorders may remit and recur spontaneously. Focal, progressive, and chronic neurological deficits suggest the presence of a neoplasm. Vascular inflammatory disorders may produce mass lesions that mimic a neoplasm. Degenerative diseases produce chronic, progressive deficits that reflect diffuse loss of specific populations of neurons. Metabolic and toxic disorders produce bilateral and symmetric deficits. The temporal profile can be acute, subacute, or chronic. Traumatic brain injury may produce sudden, diffuse impairment of neuronal function, which may resolve spontaneously or persist until death. Traumatic hematomas may mimic neoplasms. Spinal cord injury produces acute neurologic deficits, which may be followed by partial recovery, stabilization, or late deterioration. This is my last slide, and I hope you were able to pick up the more important key points from this chapter in this lecture. Thank you very much for your attention.